And Dr. Singh looked at me and said, "Do you think I should resign?" And I thought about it and I said, no. The country got 7 years of 8.4% growth and 130 million people pulled out of poverty and a very, very difficult nuclear deal agreement finished. I mean, that's a huge achievement.
My guest today on Behas with Barkha is one of India's most important economic policy makers, Montek Ahluwalia. He has a insider's account of his years advising the UPA, in particular the Prime Minister, on economic policy called Backstage, the story behind India's high growth years. Montek, welcome to the show. You know, one of the things you emphasize is the economic growth and the lifting of 138 million people out of poverty as a kind of showpiece achievement of the UPA. Why is it then that the one refrain you hear from the Modi government and its ministers again and again is the state of the economy when they inherited the government, so to speak? And the Prime Minister and, even former Finance Minister Arun Jaitley used to often say that, we should have asked for a white paper because the economy was really in a state of disrepair. Do you see that as a political comment, given the argument you make in this book?
Well, the argument I'm making in the book is that the first 7 years of the UPA, out of the 10 years, were truly outstanding. I'm not denying that then there was a downturn. Yeah. Okay, so it's quite clear that there was a downturn. Actually, when the data came out, it turned down in 2011-12 and 12-13. And 2013-14, according to the new data, it began to turn up again. Mm-hmm. Economies do go through booms and busts, or if you like, upswings, mm-hmm. followed by some downswings. Then they correct themselves and start growing again. It's quite legitimate for a political party to make whatever political case it wants to from a political point of view. But I think if you ask the question, what was the record of the UPA? It will have to be what was the record of those 10 years. And I think if you look at that, even if you accept the downturn, the average growth rate achieved in those 10 years was something like 7.6% or 7.7%, which, we had never done before. And certainly the point you make about how inclusive it was, what did it do to poverty, that was a big change, because even in the past, growth had meant that the percentage of the population that was below the poverty line would decline. But the absolute number did not decline because the total population was increasing. This was the first time when there was a sharp decline in the percentage, sharp enough so that the absolute number actually went down. 138 million people above the poverty line. Internationally, this was recognized as a major achievement.
Why did it not yield more political gains, you think? And I ask this particularly because we're sitting in Delhi, where one among many factors, and it's quite clear that there's no one factor that determines electoral outcomes alone, but one among many factors that gave the Aam Aadmi Party a kind of pro-incumbent vote was its policies on electricity and water. We'll get into whether those are sound economic policies separately. But people do vote or reward governments that deliver economically. I think that's quite clear. I think one of the big reasons that Mr. Modi did so well in 2019, one reason again were welfare schemes. If there was this staggering number of 138 million people taken above the poverty line, why did it fail to translate into political gains for the UPA?
That's a good question. I mean, since, I wasn't managing the political side of the thing.
But does it frustrate you as someone who worked on the economics and then couldn't see that?
Even when the poverty line numbers came out, obviously the opposition wouldn't want to accept that. And many people said this is a hoax on the poor, etc., etc. But funnily enough, even within the Congress party, there was a hesitation to accept that poverty has indeed gone down. So why
was that?
I don't know the answer. I mean, I argue...
The Congress itself wasn't willing to believe the numbers or trust the numbers?
I wouldn't say the Congress itself, because officially, this was mentioned. The Prime Minister mentioned it, Mrs. Gandhi mentioned it, my colleague in the Planning Commission, Minister of State for Planning, Rajiv Shukla, in Parliament said that poverty has gone down.
So who were the naysayers or the skeptics, so to
I don't think there were skeptics who were identifying themselves as skeptics, but I had a sense that the party didn't want to campaign on this or go out and make a big issue of it.
Why would that be?
I honestly
mean, given
do
that
not.
they went into 2019 with no narrative but a very belated slogan of Nyay, around a kind of minimum income guarantee program. They had no other slogan for 2019. When things were on their side, why would they not campaign? Who were these people who didn't? Is it that they didn't believe the data? Is it that they mistrusted the data?
I mean, look, I wouldn't. There was no.
Was there a discussion about it?
Oh, sure, there was a discussion. And I mean, look, if you look at the background, there was an old poverty line that was pre-Tendulkar, the Lakrawala poverty line, which was much lower, and the BJP had not changed that because there was a perception that maybe this poverty line is a bit outdated. The UPA government appointed an expert committee under Tendulkar. Tendulkar actually raised the poverty line for rural areas in order to reflect the fact that, we should now have a more reasonable line. And it was the Tendulkar line that we were using to say that, look, even on this line, there's a big decline in poverty. Why it wasn't carried through in the political discourses, I really don't have a good explanation for that.
But when it was discussed, let's say within government forums, there were other presumably ministers involved. Where did you sense this pushback or the lack of enthusiasm to convert it into political slogans or material?
Well, this is a technical kind of decision, so it's not as if the government decided whether to accept the poverty line or not. But certainly when the report came out and the Planning Commission said that we are accepting this, and the Prime Minister accepted that, it was a Planning Commission decision, nobody sort of objected. It's just that when the numbers came out and we were able to claim that poverty had gone down, somehow people didn't seem to want to claim success.
How odd.
I agree with that. I mean, it is odd.
I mean, it's completely
Very
peculiar. Was it an ego hassle? Was it ministers who sort of felt that it was having to share credit?
No,
What
because
was
the
it?
credit, after all, nobody.
Was it of the government?
I'm not saying that this is because of me. I mean,
So what was it?
My view was that, look, one is that growth trickles down.
Yes.
Proves that.
Yes.
Two, our own strategy was one which emphasized agriculture. And the agricultural performance in the UPA was better than in the previous years. For that, the credit goes to the whole government, agriculture ministry, whatever.
So what do you think happened?
I don't have a good answer, to be honest with you.
How do you...
I mean, you need someone who is talking to the political ground level.
Yeah.
I don't believe that somebody tested this out and said it won't work. I mean, if that was the case, if somebody had done a survey and said, no, people don't believe this. I just think it was a sort of...
inertia?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. It's just that there is one factor. At one level, the perception was that we're going to give a lot of benefits to the poor. So there's some suspicion that if we're saying these people are no longer poor,
why do you need to give them?
But we finesse that by saying that, look, as far as the food security entitlement is concerned, it's no longer going to be linked to whether you're poor or not. It's going to be whether you're in that percentage of the population, which is much larger than the percentage of poor. So that shouldn't have been an issue.
But we'll come a little bit later to whether there was a push and pull when it came to actually framing and executing economic policy. But a lot of the sort of key showpiece schemes of this government were actually born and conceived in the UPA. So whether it's GST, Aadhaar, for example, even after the sort of mocking of the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, it has carried forward. Again, I ask you, why does the ownership of that rest, or more effectively rest, with the Modi government than with the
in my
UPA?
view, it's a good thing.
The continuity.
After the ding-dong battle at the political level, where obviously parties are going to attack each other, it's a good thing that there isn't a complete overturning of policies and programs. Extremely disruptive. And you've seen some of that in state governments where one government says this is going to be the capital, and then all of a sudden somebody says, no, we cancel all those things. That can be very disruptive. So the fact that the programs continue is in itself a good thing. It's for the Congress party later on to claim that, look, I mean, people were rubbishing these programs, but there are programs, they're continuing. And same thing is true of GST. It's certainly true of Aadhaar. I mean, look, there's a lot of genuine pride in India today that a new set of things is happening connected with the digital economy, fintech, etc. The underpinning of this new India, if you like, is really the expansion of mobile telephony, the creation of Aadhaar as a sort of a foundational thing into what later became the India stack, and the expansion of financial inclusion, where large numbers of people were able to get bank accounts opened. And those bank accounts got opened with Aadhaar as the know your client obligation, a minimal one. And also banking became feasible because banking correspondents were introduced. So essentially, if you wanted to withdraw money from your account in a village, you didn't have to go to a bank 20 miles away. You just went to the banking correspondent, who could be the local village shopkeeper. Yeah. You transferred 200 rupees into his account telephonically, and he gave you the 200.
I agree with all of this,
but all of this was done. The foundation laid in the UPA.
But will the voter remember that?
That is the job of the parties that are seeking votes. I mean, how they market their own achievements is up to them.
So we'll come to marketing and why a sort of reticent Dr Manmohan Singh, who clearly was the person you were most impacted by in that entire government, why he could not communicate that more effectively. But I do want to ask you about something you write very clearly in the book, and it's continued to be debated till this day, which is the Vodafone Retrospective Tax. And you say that you made a strong argument against it to Pranab Mukherjee, who was then finance minister. Why did the prime minister at least not understand or intercede on that?
See, I mean, one of the problems with the way our budgets are conceived is that there's a great sense of secrecy, and you never try to violate that secrecy. So you do your bit, you make your view known, but then you don't later on ask the finance minister, by the way, were you persuaded? In this particular case, there was a lot of speculation in Delhi that they're going to do a retrospective.
Yes.
And I felt it was my duty to inform him that I thought it was a bad idea. Okay? And so I went and told him that, because he had called me, do you have any suggestions to make? And these are all, what change should be made in taxes. But in addition to the usual sort of suggestions, I said, look, I have to tell you that there is this speculation. It would be a very bad idea. And I later on, just for propriety's sake, I informed Dr Singh that I've said this to the finance minister. I didn't try to engage him and, do you agree with me? What do you
But what did he say?
No, he didn't say it. He just, look, as prime minister, I mean, it's not easy to get out of him things that he doesn't have to say.
But this was considered Pranab Mukherjee's fatal mistake. I mean, even today when people look back at it, they were like, why did he do it? And therefore, it is intriguing to me that since, as you mentioned, there was speculation that this was going to happen, would there not have been a discussion between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister?
No, I'm sure there was. Just I wasn't involved in it. I don't think at that level anybody would have been involved. That's part of the problem, in my view, in our budgets.
Is the way we...
Yeah, we've elevated budget secrecy into, I think, some kind of ridiculous tribal ritual. There'd be nothing wrong, in my view, in a group of 5 or 6 senior ministers discussing what are we going to do in this budget. And then, I mean, they can all be sworn to secrecy. One can assume that.
Yeah.
And you hear their views and then you take a final view. That's not the way it works. In fact, the entire budget group discussions, very elaborate show. I mean, I've been guilty of doing the same thing when I was finance secretary. We used to call these people and we would say nothing.
Yeah.
They would say everything. And it was part of the rules that we wouldn't say, that's a good idea, because that might give away a budget secret, right? Yeah. I think it's just silly. However, given that that was the case, having made my point, I made no effort to find out from either the finance minister or, for that matter, the prime minister, what happened. I mean, I honestly did not know until the budget was delivered.
Can you speak to the damage it did?
I think it's more a matter of principle. And, in all these things, damage is never permanent. I made this point somewhere. Somebody sort of said that retrospective amendments are bad anyway, okay? But the fact is that our revenue department told us that even in the UK and in the US, some retrospective changes have been made.
But it seemed to be the beginning of the end of Vodafone as a viable entity in India.
No, but that's because of other things that have happened since then. Because after all, Vodafone, I mean,
the telecom sector has changed. There's a big player, Jio, that's entered.
Separate set of issues which also illustrate. I would come back to what you said. One of the problems is that, if you become finance minister and your revenue department comes up to you and says that, here is a case where we won the argument in the Bombay High Court. I think the lawyer for the government was Rohinton Nariman, who's now on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
We won that argument, but then we lost it in the Supreme Court. And it's easy to internally to say, well, the Supreme Court got it wrong, and it's a huge amount of money involved, and this is one way of making sure that these guys pay. Okay, I mean, it becomes difficult for a finance minister faced with a situation where you're trying to reduce the fiscal deficit and all the rest of it to give that up. Maybe that's what persuaded. But see, the other point that should have been made, I think, is that you want to create confidence that when the Supreme Court has said something, that stands as the legal interpretation. I made the point then that, look, if you want to do this, that you want to tax indirect gains, do it prospectively. Then everybody knows what the issue is, and whoever buys a company knows that they have to pay the tax, even on indirect gains. They'll factor that in the price that they pay for buying the company. So prospective change is not a problem.
Yeah.
It's retrospective,
yeah.
But worse than that,
it's going against what the Supreme Court said.
That was my view.
Did Pranab Mukherjee say anything when you made this argument?
No, but no finance minister comments. I mean, look, poor finance ministers at that time, they're receiving hundreds of comments, not just from outsiders, but even from within the government.
But do you count it as one of the biggest mistakes he made as FM?
Well, I think it was a mistake, but I wouldn't put it on his door. I wouldn't put it as something that does permanent damage, for the simple reason that, when you have a big economy and that economy wants foreign investment, everybody understands that here and there somebody is going to be hit, and maybe hit unfairly. But it doesn't stop people from wanting to invest. They know how to take some risks. This is one of the risks. It becomes a kind of a political risk, I think.
How do you make sense of what's happening in the telecom sector today, where you have two of these behemoths, literally tottering?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, I mean, I attribute it to, it's the cost of running a system in which our laws and regulations are very unclear and open to multiple interpretations, okay? When you have a bunch of companies that have, on a certain interpretation, they've gone along and saying that, look, when we pay X% of gross revenues, this is what gross revenues means. And other certain revenues are not part of telecom revenue. Yeah. This has been going on. Then we have a pretty elaborate system of appeal. And if the TD-SAT, or whatever the highest level of appeal, has actually agreed with the companies on this, the government took the matter to the Supreme Court, which, as it turned out, took the opposite view. I feel in some of these things that the government, many people have said this, the government should have some self-restraint in when it appeals. And the trouble is that when you appeal tax matters which affect one or two companies, it becomes very sensitive. Yeah. Because anybody arguing against it can be seen to be speaking in favor of A or speaking
one
in
corporate
favor
or the other, yeah.
That's not the same thing if you say that, look, this general thing which affects hundreds of companies should be different. Because
so what would you do if you were the government today with a Vodafone or an Airtel?
I don't know enough about.
Would you step in? Would you step in? Would you want the Is it the government's place to step in on this, considering the matter is in court?
Well, let's put it this way: I guess the government matters are always in court based on whatever the existing law is, and if the Supreme Court has read the law in a particular way. And you feel that, this is, but the problem is, they're the ones who went to court. Yeah. So they would have to get up and say,
we made a mistake, or we've changed our mind.
Well, or they would say that, well, we thought these guys could pay, but actually now that we look at it, they can't without collapsing. It's not easy, by the way. I mean, and I think this is where I have no doubt that if the largest and maybe two of the largest out of the three remaining telecom companies were to collapse, that would be an extremely unhealthy development in the telecom sector.
Now, talking about regulations, one of the things that comes out quite clearly in the book is your, for lack of a better word, sympathy with the angst in sort of industry. That every time there was a clash, for example, with environmental concerns or environmental regulations, there wasn't a kind of lucid, cogent mechanism in place where this could be resolved, keeping in mind that the environment needs to be protected, but not stalling development. And we've seen in the UPA some very high-profile collisions on this. The environment ministers, whether it was Jairam Ramesh or Jayanti Natarajan, both made headlines for their own reasons. The stories of their clash with other ministers pretty much leaked in the media the whole time. Rahul Gandhi then goes and addresses the Chamber of Commerce. Jayanti gets embroiled in other allegations. I mean, this was one of the big fault lines of the UPA. From the inside, how was this playing out and how did this actually impact growth and, clearing projects?
No, there's no question that it had a very negative impact on clearing projects. I should say, by the way, that part of this is growing pains, because I would say it is true that the development process earlier tended to understate the need to protect the environment. Even the public sector, when it sort of wanted to do all kinds of things, that was a world in which the public sector was pushing development and nobody cared very much about whose rights in terms of land acquisition, etc., got affected. Then you had a situation where it was opened up, not just the public sector, but the private sector. See, the moment the private sector comes in, the public anger at somebody's land being acquired in order to accommodate the private sector is bound to be much greater than to accommodate the public sector, although it shouldn't be. I mean, the strong NGOs, but just as opposed to the public sector doing this kind of thing, right? Part of the problem, I feel, is that the regulatory system was weak and non-transparent, in the sense that the guys would go and ask for permission and they'd get permission. And then they'd start work.
And then there would be an environmental...
The NGOs would come along and say, they're violating the terms of the permission. Now, that may well be the case. But the system was so poorly defined that almost certainly you would find that they're violating something or the other. So then the question is, what do you do? One approach is that you always have a problem-solving approach. That means you keep watching and say, look, you can't do that, and but that's not the way it worked, because much of the opposition to these projects was not aimed at solving the problem, but actually stopping the project. Fundamentally, I mean, for example, the case of Niyamgiri, for example. It was a non-economic issue, but a relevant issue, because the Dongria Cone said that this hill, which happens to have bauxite and is being mined by a Orissa government mining corporation, is actually violating our belief, religious belief, because this is actually the home of Niyam Raja, who's our idea of a deity. So, how do you handle this problem? By the way, this was the origin of the Avatar film, which was a global success.
But let me come in there, because I remember the Niyamgiri project being one of those high-profile moments when Rahul Gandhi basically stood up in favor of what the local people felt. And this, I think, was happening repeatedly in the UPA, wherein this was seen to be a party versus government clash, particularly on industry versus environment. I hate to use this word versus. I know the polarity is a little more complex than that, but a perception grew. And would you agree with it that the Prime Minister, or maybe people like yourself, or ministers like Sharad Pawar, had one view, let's say on a Lavasa, and as Sonia Gandhi and the National Advisory Council, the NSC, had quite a different NGO view. And there was an essential ideological clash that could never be resolved.
Well, I mean, all you guys bring in the NAC all the time. That's not the way I saw it.
Okay, how did you see it?
Nor would I say the Prime Minister was solidly on one side. I think the Prime Minister, anyone who knows him, knows that he's an ideal sort of balancing kind of person. I think he recognized that development was important. He also recognized the legitimate NGO concerns. And really, the name of the game was how to balance them. But I don't think we had a regulatory environment that was trying to do the balancing.
But did you have a political environment internally, or a kind of internal consistency or cohesion? Maybe that's the word I should use. Don't say NSC. There's a sense that Mrs. Gandhi or Rahul Gandhi may have had a very different perspective. Let's say on Lavasa, for example. That was another high-profile case that I remember, spilt into the public domain at that time. So I'm saying you can pick up any number of examples.
You mentioned Mrs. Gandhi, so let me mention, I haven't mentioned this in the book, but NGOs were lobbying Mrs. Gandhi all the time about the Andamans, the Jarawa reservation. Yes. There's a single road that goes through the reservation, and they wanted that road blocked. They lobby everybody, so they were lobbying Mrs. Gandhi also. Mrs. Gandhi had said, we must look at this, okay? So we went back and explained through her secretariat what the issue was. The issue really was that if you were in the northern part of the island and you blocked the road, then the only way to get to the south would be through a ferry. It would take much longer. There are no hospital facilities in the north. A woman with a complicated pregnancy, you'd actually be sort of ruling out medical attention. So we had this method of, let the road remain open, but restricted traffic and that kind. And I think she accepted that. NGOs were going to her all the time, saying that we must now stop this road, and that didn't happen.
Maybe she accepted it in this one case, but would you accept that one of the problems, when you say there wasn't a regulatory environment, I think what I'm trying to get at is, was there a political clarity within on how to handle this? Because there is a perception that Dr. Singh and Mrs. Gandhi were not coming from the same impulses. Impulses is the word I'd use on economic policy.
In any balancing, I think the concerns of the NGOs were valid concerns. And I think they needed to get reflected in government. The fact that within the government there were people with different points of view is not in itself a bad thing. On the contrary, in my view, it's a very healthy thing.
But was it frustrating for you at any one particular point when you felt something needed to be done, but the political mood in the party would simply not permit it?
I don't think it's a party issue. I think part of the problem was that when NGOs made the case they did, they made it on the basis of environmental regulations that were extremely vague. And could be interpreted anyway. So I think we need a complete rewriting of how do we decide what is the right thing to do. Let me give you another example, which is the Western Ghats. There was one report, Gadgil, I think, who basically said that, we must declare the entire area as an eco-sensitive area and basically stop development. So we felt this was a bit excessive. So what we did was, let's have a second report. And we put in the Kasturi Rangan committee. Kasturi Rangan was then a member of parliament. He was a former chairman of ISRO, outstanding scientist and God's good man, and certainly not anybody who would succumb to corporate pressure. So they came up with a modification. Certain kinds of development are allowed, certain kinds are not allowed. I think we should have done more, and I think that you need that even today. You need to bring in a more transparent system of setting criteria. And if that is done, the government then must back the permissions given. Actually what was happening was that
the permissions were given.
Somebody appealed, government promptly backed off and cancelled the permission. That is not. Now, frankly, this was a learning process. Because remember, we had never had such a huge amount of investment before. The great boom in the UPA was because of investment, and most of it was private investment. The same investment by the public sector would not have aroused the same amount of antipathy.
But this kind
the private sector did.
But this kind of, sort of unintended chaos, one of the episodes you talk about in the book is a political one, which is when Rahul Gandhi goes very dramatically and tears up an ordinance that is going to protect politicians who have been convicted in corruption. The person being saved at that time was Lalu Prasad Yadav. Now, You remember, but just for our viewers, Dr. Manmohan Singh is in the United States of America when this happens, and there's a view that he should resign. You write in the book that your brother wrote a piece saying he should resign, and you go and tell Dr. Singh about this, but you personally did not think that he needed to resign. Why was that? Because a lot of people look at that moment, a lot of people look at that moment and say, that was the moment that Dr. Manmohan Singh diminished himself. And if at that moment, perhaps he had just said enough, and walked away, maybe history would have remembered him, as he always said, in a kinder way, much more so.
No, I completely disagree with that.
Okay, tell me why.
He, in fact, when I showed him my brother's article, my brother had emailed it to me and said, look, I hope you don't mind this tough stuff. So I want to be the first person to show Dr. Singh that, look, this is my brother's view. And Dr. Singh looked at me and said, do you think I should resign? And I thought about it and I said, no. And later on, I did wonder, that am I just saying this because this is what he wants to hear, according to me? Or do I really believe that? And when I came back home, I found most people agreed with my brother. I didn't, and let me say why. See, the first point is, you have to look at it either in terms of procedure or substance. The substantive issue of whether the ordinance was right or wrong, I think Rahul was on the right side of it, because it was clearly something that would be seen to be defending a particular personality. And
but his mother was part of the core group that decided it, right?
But see, this is my point. Is there anything wrong in a party having inner-party democracy where people express different views?
But externally to do that to a prime minister when he's on a trip abroad?
Let me put it this way. This notion that the prime minister should not be questioned by anybody...
No, I don't think that. Dr. Manmohan Singh,
nobody bothers about it abroad. I mean, there are many... I mean, after all, in the United States, people in the party are constantly criticizing the president of the same party because they don't agree with everything. Now, we do have a discipline. The discipline is that if you're an MP, you mustn't vote against the government. You can abstain, but you don't vote against. It doesn't say that you can't express your view. So on the substance, frankly, if Dr. Singh had resigned on substance, saying that, look, I think this is wrong, we should in fact protect, I mean, that would be absurd. He would not want, and I believe he wouldn't have wanted that. So then the issue is process. Now, my view on that is that, look, he was not a member of the cabinet. He publicly expressed his view. It was a view that I think most younger people actually agreed with. And Dr. Manmohan Singh was a big enough person that when asked the question, he said, yes, the vice president has written to me and we'll discuss it.
But the point you make in your book is a very important one, which is that there was a confusion in the chain of command because the Congress saw him as the leader of the party or the prospective or the next leader of the party, and he wasn't in the cabinet, so he wasn't accountable or reporting to Dr. Singh. Therefore, he should have joined the cabinet.
I firmly believe that the UPA would have been much better if he had been in the cabinet. I mean, his views would have been known. He would have had an opportunity to discuss these issues internally. And whatever compromise, if you like, emerged, would have had everybody on board.
So you didn't think Dr. Singh should have resigned at this moment? Were there any other moments that you thought he should have resigned for his own personal credibility?
Well, I think the one area which I do mention in the book is in connection with the nuclear deal. You know, I do say that the nuclear deal was an extremely important development in Indian foreign policy, not appreciated in India because most people in India saw it as some kind of a deal between India and the US, and India getting close to the US. The truth is that the Indo-US nuclear deal was a package, and the most important from our point of view in the package was the agreement that the US would help us get a clean waiver from the nuclear suppliers group, which is a group of 34 countries that actually trade in nuclear fuel, nuclear material, nuclear technology. This group's rules said that if you're not a member of the NPT, you don't get anything. And that was highly discriminatory to India because we did not want to give up nuclear weapons. We felt that NPT was unfair. But as a result, we were being denied technology, not just nuclear, but you know, they had interpreted the thing to be related technologies, computer technology, military, all kinds of things. So I think Dr. Singh was very keen, as he put it, to break the nuclear apartheid. There was pressure within the party. Some people were not happy. Even within the Atomic Energy Commission, some of the earlier members of the commission felt that somehow this was all a plot to get American reactors into India and affect our, I mean, whatever it is. And the left, of course, was very much opposed to it. So I think that he tried to persuade them, he built up support, understand things, etc. At the last stage, 2008 or something like that, Mr. Prakash Karat sort of threatened that you should not send the matter to the IAEA because that was a necessary step for the Americans to actually sign on the nuclear deal. And at that point, there were rumors, and I do mention here that Mrs. Gandhi had spoken to me and said, look, please try and persuade him that resigning on this issue is not a good idea because the party doesn't want an election on this issue, which is true. But there, frankly, since he had himself made the case that this is in the nation's interest, not insisting on carrying this forward would have been a betrayal of principle. So I think there he was right to insist, and frankly, Mrs. Gandhi backed him. In the end, Mrs. Gandhi backed him. The nuclear deal would never have happened if Mrs. Gandhi was not willing to back Manmohan Singh. The left departed, Mulayam Singh came on board, lots of manipulation. And I think Indian democracy, both within party, ability to mobilize support, I think came out extremely well. And we are a highly diverse country, and we need to have a history in which people can show that at difficult times, even parties that don't agree with each other can get together. So I think that's my story on the nuclear deal.
So one of the arguments that you make in the book, and this is, with the benefit of hindsight, you would hope that someone had made it more effectively then, is that the 2G scam was not a scam, that there could have been a more effective argument placed in the public domain that wasn't. The coal scam, as it turns out, you had the coal secretary actually acquitted after being convicted, and then he's appealed against all of his convictions and so on. What do you think happened there? Why was there such a paralysis in being effectively able to explain what you do in the book, which is that there was a kind of stimulus in offering the spectrum at a lower rate?
Well, these points were actually made, but, they were made in Parliament. I mean, the Prime Minister himself, he was very clear that he said, look, in the public mind, this thing is being shown as a huge loss to the exchequer, and that is actually linked to auction pricing. And the fact is that what the government did, they didn't do an auction. It's not a universal practice to do auctions, and many countries don't do auctions, and many countries have found that when you do an auction, people bid too high, and then there's a problem. Okay? So what they did was entirely in line with what the TRAI said, because the TRAI said you carry on doing what you've been doing before. There were aspects of the allocation which were not, in my view, and I think even Dr. Manmohan Singh had pointed out that, some of the way they allocated things
was not kosher, was favoritism
kosher.
And so on.
And he said these are being examined and the law will take its course. Now, this is the critical thing. His view was that if something is wrong, then the law should take its course. Not that if somebody in the opposition cries foul, that you immediately throw the minister out. Now, when it was a purely Congress minister, two ministers were persuaded to resign. The railway minister at the time and my former colleague Ashwini Kumar, who was at that time law minister, because of something that was felt, wasn't quite proper. They were Congress ministers, so it was easy for them to do that. But to do it to a minister who belongs to one of the coalition parties is a much more complex thing. And that party would have said, look, why don't you let the law take its course? Now, the problem in India is that the law takes an enormously long time
to take its course.
And in a world of Twitter and social media and what have you, I mean, you've lost the argument if you haven't done anything in 3 months. All said and done, Raja resigned. I mean, it's not that he stayed. But people were saying, do something. And as it turned out, I mean, in the 2G case,
the court
Judge
also
Saini said that all the allegations that were being made were not proven.
But there was also the Supreme Court in the Justice Singhvi case who questioned the policy.
No, you see,
per se,
let's be
right?
clear. What Justice Singhvi said was that the manner of allocation
Was the problem.
not right, and on that basis he cancelled
The allocation.
all the, he also went further, and he said, you auction this. So he took, he and two of them, he said, no, you should auction. Now this raised the issue that, is auctioning mandatory? And the government went back to the Supreme Court, but in order not to be confrontational, the government said, look, we're not we'll auction this.
Yeah.
And I think they also realized that the public mood at that time was such that if you didn't auction, nobody would believe.
Yeah.
But for the future, they asked the question, do scarce natural resources have to be auctioned? Now that the five-judge bench gives a very important answer. They categorically said that no, auctioning is not mandatory. The government is free to choose some other method. But the method must be
Should be
fair
executed
and
in a non-discriminatory and
If somebody
transparent
comes and
manner.
says, look,
Give it to me because I'll give you this.
If somebody said this is not an auction, that's not an argument. But
Yeah.
if someone says the method is non-transparent, we will intervene. So I thought that made things a lot clearer. But certainly the argument that you lost huge amounts of money, that was a bit of a red herring. See, the point really is in the way the CAG report was put forward, it was almost as if not auctioning
High cost.
or not using the price that emerged from an auction 2 years later was a violation of policy. It wasn't a violation of policy at all, because the existing policy was that the finance ministry and the telecom ministry must agree. And it's true that earlier the finance ministry wanted an auction, but they finally agreed to have a non-auction.
Well, I think it was a failure of a lot of things. The way the policy was executed, not the policy per se, and also a complete sort of diminishing grip over the narrative or in the public imagination.
I think the latter is, in my view, the crucial thing. I don't know. One view is that all the narrative would be in Parliament and a free and
But
vigilant
politics has changed, and the way people consume content has changed, and where people get their information from has changed. So
100%
there's
agree
all
with
of that. In the end, I want to ask you, where do you? There's been this old cliched debate of good economics, bad politics, bad economics, good politics, right? How do you look at this huge debate around what is loosely called freebies, right? I don't even know if electricity and water can be put in that bucket, because they seem like essential livelihood deliverables and not like mixies and TV sets that, for example, Jayalalitha or in the Tamil Nadu we saw. But there is going to be a pressure now on all parties after what's happened in Delhi, this free/vastly subsidized electricity and water model. Where do you weigh in on this?
Let me say that we had, in the Planning Commission, we had said, I think for the 11th plan, that there's nothing wrong with underpricing an essential item up to a certain level. So, in the first slab, let's say, take electricity. In some sense, electricity becomes the sort of the wherewithal to lead a modern life. It's a disaster to underprice electricity across the board, but it's not a disaster to give a lifeline amount at a very low cost, which could even be free if you want. But what it means is the others must pay for it.
But you're saying that it should be per consumption. I'm asking you why it can't be per income.
No,
as in, should you and me pay the same as my driver for electricity, even if for the same amount consumed?
The short answer is no. When you have the first 200 units or whatever it is are free, they're free to you also.
Yes, I'm saying they shouldn't be free for me.
Well, but it's the same. If you recover the cost of those 200 in the next slab and the slab after, then in effect, once you are above a certain slab, and you can be pretty sure that
there is an income differentiation.
They are in fact paying. They're not really getting it free. They're paying the subsidy that poorer people are getting, and in effect recouping their own subsidy through the higher price. I think the same thing holds for water. So the Delhi Chief Minister's decision that a lifeline supply is kept low priced or free, providing you recover the cost from the rest, is not unreasonable. As you say, other freebies is totally absurd. Now, in all political processes, there's always a temptation to do something which will somehow attract votes. And that can be very dangerous. One hopes that people are able to keep this to a limited amount. Otherwise, quite frankly, what will happen is that the financial capacity of the government is seriously jeopardized, and the rest of the system collapses. But the trouble is that can take some time, so it may not collapse in the first 6 months.
And therefore, you discover the damage much later.
Only an informed electorate, only an informed party mechanism can persuade people that, look, don't vote for this kind of thing because you're in. And
that's very difficult to do in this environment.
Yeah, but nobody said that democracy was an easy system to run. We're going to learn how to do it.
So I have to ask you before I thank you that there's a huge debate about Dr Manmohan Singh, whom you know very well, whether he was an underestimated politician. And I've always heard two views on this. There's one view that says that, look, he was a technocrat in government and he was an administrator to that degree, a thoughtful, democratic administrator, and who should have communicated more, who should have put his foot down at point A and point B. There's another view that says that actually Dr Manmohan Singh lasted as long as he did, had the top job twice, because actually he is a politician.
Oh, I go along with the latter, but he's, if you like, a different kind of politician from what many people think. He's certainly demonstrated over this period, and even earlier as finance minister, his ability to deal with Indian political constraints. I think we have to remember that if you're running a majority government and you're the undisputed political leader of the party, you have a lot of, you have a different environment.
Yeah, sure.
If you're running a coalition government in which an important part of the support is outside the coalition, the Congress is not that strong within the coalition, and you're not the political head of the Congress, you need a different kind of person. And I think he was, in many ways, the ideal person to handle that situation. Now, the only thing you can complain about is if you feel that in this process, what the hell did the country get? Well, I've given the answer. The country got 7 years of 8.4% growth and 130 million people pulled out of poverty, and a very, very difficult nuclear deal agreement finished. That's a huge achievement. So to say that the guy who was running the show is not a politician doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, we leave it there. Backstage, the story behind India's high growth years by Montek Ahluwalia. Pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you.